Hello, everybody, and welcome to Season 3, Episode 21 of A Conversation with Cometan. Of course, I'm your host, Cometan, and today I'm going to be presenting to you my latest lecture called Astronism, Combining Astronomy and Spirituality. I'm pretty excited for this one because it allows me to explore a dimension of astronomism that sometimes can get a little bit left behind when we're talking about transcension and cosmocentrism and some of the more philosophical elements. Today, we're going to be looking into the more spiritual, metaphysical elements of astronomism. And I think this is a topic that a lot of people have been wanting to know a little bit more about. So I hope you enjoy this lecture today. Now, just to begin with section 1, which of course is titled Metaphysical Astronomy, what I want to do in this section is to provide the sort of the foundations, the grounds for why there is a spirituality of astronomism at all. I mean, there is, of course, you could say, a philosophical debate taking place and has always taken place really about the existence of metaphysical dimensions to the world, to objects, to people. And of course, with our cosmocentric worldview that we hold in astronomism, this debate, of course, then transcends to the astronomical world. And so this is where the topic of metaphysical astronomy emerged. And of course, this is an important part of astronomism and some of the things that we discuss and believe. So the kind of central doctrine, therefore, of metaphysical astronomy or spirituality of astronomism is metaphysicalism. And of course, this begins from the fundamental notion that there is more to cosmic reality than what we as human beings are able to perceive using our senses. There are dimensions to the cosmic reality that are not perceivable to us, that are not experientiable by us. And of course, this means that they are beyond what we can see, hear, touch, smell, or taste. Because this is how we as humans interact with the world. We use our senses. And what metaphysicalism is saying is that there are things beyond the senses. There are realms, objects, places that are beyond human perceptibility. And of course, this lays the foundations for why in astronomism we believe in the metaphysical astronomical world. So this assertion, of course, that there exists metaphysical dimensions to people, to the external stimuli, the external world, is the basis of all spirituality. And of course, these non-physical realms that we are suggesting exist, or that we believe exist in various different schools of astronomism, some sort of affirm that this exists, and then other ones are a little bit more skeptical, which is great because, of course, we've got to keep up with the philosophical spirit, and we've got to keep up with these debates that are taking place. And so that's why we have the different schools of astronomism. But these sort of non-physical realms of the astronomical world are, of course, connected to our own individual non-physical essences, or spirit, or soul, whatever you want to call it. And so just as the non-physical realms are connected to the spirit, to the soul, so are, of course, the whole physical realm is connected to the body. We are connected to the earth, we are connected to each other, but we're also connected to, of course, the astronomical world. And we've explored that in the Astronic tradition and looked at the origins of humanity, for example. So the essence of metaphysicalism is that just as the non-physical relates to the non-physical, so does the physical relate to the physical in regards to the realm, but then also the individual person. And there always seems to be kind of this this distinction between the realm and also sometimes the collective people and then the individual person. So you've got the astronomical world, humanity, and then the individual. A lot of sort of Astronist doctrines, especially regarding transcension, seem to be oriented along those lines and kind of focus on those three different categories. But yeah, and I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it, that if our physical bodies are connected to or are in flux with the physical world, that our non-physical essence, that our metaphysical essence, our spirit, our soul, is connected to the non-physical elements of the external world. So obviously, as I've just explored, due to our cosmocentric worldview in Astronism, we apply the concept of the spirit, of the soul, of the metaphysical to the astronomical world. And of course, this produces this doctrine of metaphysicalism, which officially is that the doctrine that there exists non-physical dimensions to outer space. And that's basically the doctrine there. And of course, this also sets the sort of basis for Astronist spiritual and mystical engagement with the astronomical world, which is of course related to the goal of the individual astronist in the form of astrosis, which is of course we're going to look at a little bit later on. But the metaphysicalism doctrine just lays the grounds for that, lays the grounds for these other elements of astronism to be explored. So I think at this stage, what is also important is to make distinctions between three fairly closely related doctrines in astronism. These are metaphysicalism, astrospiritualism, and extralism. Okay, so I'm going to make the distinctions now. Metaphysicalism simply states that there are non-physical elements to the astronomical world, to outer space. Okay, so it's not affirming the existence of I suppose you could say it's implying the existence of the non-physical elements of the human being or of sapient beings, if you want to be a bit more inclusive. But technically it isn't. Technically, it's only referring to the idea that there are metaphysical dimensions to the astronomical world. And of course, this doctrine encompasses the idea of the existence of non-physical entities as well as the non-physical realm. The assertion is also made that such non-physical entities are not experientiable for human sensory perception. Okay, and I'm explored that in the previous slide. So that is the basis there of metaphysicalism. It's basically saying that the astronomical world possesses non-physical, metaphysical components that are not perceptible through human senses, basically. Supersensual, sometimes we call it. And that these non-physical elements exist beyond the physical ones that we can actually see, hear, touch, smell, and taste. So that's that. Then you come down to astrospiritualism, which is the idea that the astronomical world holds a spiritual capacity. Okay, so I'm distinguishing there between sort of metaphysical and then spiritual. I think there is a distinction there. I mean, in metaphysicalism, you could say that there are metaphysical, non-physical dimensions to the astronomical world, but these could be empty. These could be, I mean, could you even apply that term, empty, to these places, to these dimensions of the astronomical world? That's something interesting to look at maybe another time. But the essence here is the difference between metaphysical and spiritual. I relate kind of spiritual more to obviously the human spirit and the human soul. What astrospiritualism is stating is essentially is that the astronomical world is able to engage with the human soul, is connected to the human soul. So the human being is spiritually connected to the astronomical world, essentially. And so that to me slightly different doctrine to the one that we just looked at with metaphysicalism. I think they are slightly different. Then you've got the idea of the spiritual capacity of the human can engage with the metaphysical aspects of the astronomical world, like I just said, which is encompassed actually by the doctrine of supersensualism. I know there's a lot of words here, but try and bear with me. It's just trying to kind of organize all these different ideas together, really. That's why we have so many different words and terms. Then we have finally this idea, this third doctrine really of extralism, which is the idea that the astronomical world is imbued with the spirits of the dead, based on the notion that at death, a convergence of souls takes place in the astronomical world as part of the process of cosmosis. So what we have there is metaphysicalism at the top, which is stating that the astronomical world merely possesses, it's merely stating, that the astronomical world possesses non-physical components, dimensions, elements. That's all that's saying. That's all that is saying. Then the next one is astrospiritualism. That's saying that the astronomical world holds a spiritual capacity because it holds metaphysical dimensions. Because of that. And I think that's something that also should be said now, is that the extralism at the bottom is dependent on the truth of astrospiritualism, and the truth of astrospiritualism is based on the truth of metaphysicalism. Okay, so they kind of go back all the way to metaphysicalism, really. If metaphysicalism isn't true, then the other ones can't be true, essentially. So we've got this idea of, this astrospiritualism, the idea that the astronomical world possesses spiritual capacity. And of course, then that connects to the human possession of a soul. Okay. And then finally, because there is this human soul, and because it's connected to the astronomical world, there is a convergence of human souls once they're released from the body at death in the astronomical world. And so therefore the astronomical world is imbued with spirits of the dead, imbued with spirits of those deceased, okay? Those souls that have been released from the human body at death, okay? So we've got these distinctions. Hopefully you guys can see where the distinctions are in these main doctrines. And also there at the bottom, I've just given a short definition of what metaphysical astronomy is. I see it as the study and philosophical consideration of these non-physical aspects or non-physical human interactions with the astronomical world. So again, that's kind of trying to encompass the study of the non-physical aspects of the astronomical world, as well as the non-physical human interactions with the astronomical world. I think I just repeated myself there, but anyway, essentially what metaphysical astronomy is trying to understand is what is the extent of these metaphysical realms, and what is the extent of human interaction with these metaphysical realms. And that is the essence of what metaphysical astronomy is trying to grasp, really. So what are the grounds for this doctrine of metaphysicalism then? So I think in the previous slide, what should have been sort of taken away from is this idea that other astro-spiritual beliefs are dependent on the truth of metaphysicalism, dependent on the idea that the astronomical world possesses metaphysical components. And we can kind of look at this sort of philosophically, really. We can look at this in terms of the grounds, the philosophical grounds for the existence of metaphysical dimensions to the world. And of course, two philosophical schools that believe or support the idea of metaphysicality, you could call it, is dualism and idealism. Okay, so dualism asserts the existence of that the existence of a physical implies or otherwise necessitates the existence of a non-physical. So, of course, in the dualist perspective, there is always the opposite that exists. So black and then white, or day and night, or good and evil is a great example of dualism. And of course, dualism can be applied in this sense. If the physical exists, and we know it exists, we can feel it, we can touch it, it's here, then the metaphysical must also exist as the diametrical opposite of the physical. Okay, so that's how dualism provides the grounds for metaphysicalism. Then we also have this really interesting idea of idealism, which asserts that the physical world is inseparable from, or is merely subjected to, human perception, meaning that if the non-physical can be perceived, then its classification as real is justified. So basically what we're saying there is that if, and some people might think that this is contradicting what I've said previously, it's not. So the human perception of the non-physical. So this comes down to how we know, or how we believe, or what are the grounds for the existence of our soul. Some people have said that they know, they feel they have a soul. Some people have had spiritual experiences that have provided them with the sort of justification, really, for belief in metaphysical realms. And this is kind of playing into the idea of idealism, which is that human perception, it essentially places human perception at the top of the hierarchy in terms of what is real, and kind of makes inseparable anything from human perception. So if you can perceive it, if the human person can perceive it, then it is real in idealism. And so that then provides the basis for the existence of the metaphysical. And so obviously previously I've just said that you can't, that the human senses cannot perceive the metaphysical. And what I should have probably said on top of that is that, yes, that is true, that we can't see, feel, touch, taste, or smell the metaphysical, unless there are dimensions of the metaphysical that come so close to our physical, or come into the physical world, become physical in a sense. So they are originally metaphysical, they become physical. That's a way that we could experience non-physical entities. And of course, things like that emerge when we see ghosts, or even the idea of the mediumship ideas. So you're kind of moving into kind of spiritualism there, this idea that humans can perceive spiritual. I think what I actually mean there is the spiritual elements of the metaphysical. I think that's what I mean there. The idealism is not saying that the metaphysical can be perceived. I think what it's saying is that the spiritual can be perceived. And I think that's, again, more related to the astro-spiritualism doctrine that I just spoke about, rather than metaphysicalism. But of course, if astro-spiritualism is true, then so must metaphysicalism be true, okay? Because metaphysicalism has to be true in order for astro-spiritualism to be true. So I think that's where actually idealism finds its sort of grounds for metaphysicalism. But I got there in the end. It was I don't think I worded that great, so apologies for that, but hopefully you guys kind of understood where I was coming from there. Then we also have this third grounds for metaphysicalism, which is the idea of emotionalism. It's this approach that that the capacity really of a sapient being to experience or otherwise engage with their astronality, so we're bringing in more astronist ideas now, at various physical and non-physical levels, supports the notion of a metaphysical dimension. Again, this is slightly related to idealism, not quite, but it is very much related to it. It's not quite identical, but the things that I'm citing here are, for example, my experience of astral ecstasy or astral visions or indrasy, other non-physical phenomena that are in relation to the astronomical world, are involving the astronomical world, or are supported through one's experience of astronality, essentially. So that is, again, established as a grounds for metaphysicalism. If there is this emotion that you can engage with, which is of course astronality, and it has both physical and non-physical dimensions, non-physical levels, then that provides some grounds again for metaphysicalism. And then we have some more kind of more peripheral grounds for metaphysicalism, you could say. The idea that there remains still unexplainable aspects of the astronomical world that point to a metaphysical existence, such as the nature of black holes. Where you go into a black hole, do you go into the metaphysical? Is a black hole the portal, if you will, to the metaphysical aspects of the astronomical world? And where does that go? So that's just one example. There are many others. Then you've also got this idea of so again, sorry, just before I move on, the unexplainability or the unknowability of the astronomical world also provides some grounds for metaphysicalism, is what I should have said there. The ordered principle of the cosmos as well points to a metaphysical force. So it's this idea that the cosmos, it's kind of a traditional idea of the cosmos in the sense that it exists, it runs on a very ordered, seemingly perfect, it's not perfect, but it is amazing to think about how the moon, the planets, the stars, they all are functioning in a very ordered way. And you could say, I mean, in astronism, we call this the astron force that is behind the astronomical world's functionality. There are other ones as well. There's the Chinese concept of the Tao, which of course refers to this sort of underlying principle of existence that in a way the astronomical world, the physical world, is ordered along the lines of a force that is pushing it forward and allowing it to function. So again, that would be metaphysical, wouldn't it? Whatever this force may be, or may be called. Then you've got the idea of immaterialism, which denies the existence of the material aspects of the astronomical world when it is applied in the context of astronist philosophy. So I don't really subscribe to the idea of immaterialism, but it is a approach to metaphysicalism, and so that's why I've included it here. It essentially affirms the metaphysical while denying the material. Maybe it sees the material as some kind of illusion or not the real astronomical world, or not the real existence. The real existence is in the metaphysical, the immaterial, the non-physical. Okay, so that's kind of what immaterialism is stating there. Then you've also got theological grounds for metaphysicalism. Of course, this asserts that the existence of God or gods as pervading or intervening in the cosmos, and so therefore for God to be able to do this, God must intervene through the non-physical dimensions of the astronomical world. And of course, that relates to the human spirit, but also through the spirit of the cosmos, you could say, itself. That is God. In pantheism, they have these kind of ideas that the cosmos is God, but also that the cosmos has some kind of spirit or soul. And again, you can kind of see how that is a pre-Astronist conception of metaphysicalism. I'm not going to go through the grounds of astrospiritualism because I don't want to get too much off track, but I did just want to include it there at the bottom. So if you pause now and just read, if you wish, just pause now and just read some of the grounds for astrospiritualism, just because it's kind of just a derivation of the grounds for metaphysicalism. And I don't want to go too far off track. So just pause now and take a look at that. So what essentially metaphysicalism is asserting is that there is a veil, and I like to describe it in this way, that there is a astro-spiritual metaphysical veil that is placed across all cosmic existence and that conceals behind it, I should have said physical existence there. And what conceals behind it is the metaphysical aspects of cosmic reality. Okay, so this veil is what we can penetrate through the human, by using the human spirit, by our possession of a soul. We have the tools, we have you could say even the knowledge, the essence within us to penetrate this veil that penetrate between the physical and the non-physical. Okay, and this is what we call sometimes the metaphysical veil or the astro-spiritual veil, and it is our. So for example, in Astronism, we don't really believe, I mean, there are some maybe elements of Astronism that might affirm this, called cosmic animism, but generally we wouldn't refer to an inanimate object as having a soul or a spirit. So as you can see there on the picture, we've got the mountain. Now, the mountain does not have, in my opinion, the spiritual capacity to penetrate this veil that I'm talking about. The mountain will forever remain physical. It cannot move into the non-physical. It cannot penetrate the astro-spiritual veil. It cannot do that. The only things that can do that, the only entities that can, are entities that possess that same metaphysicality. And that's the only reason why. If the mountain had a soul, then it could do that in this sort of logic. But I don't believe a mountain has a soul, and so therefore the mountain will always remain physical. So it's about this idea of there existing a barrier or a veil between the physical and the metaphysical, and the idea that humans, due to our possession of a soul, that we are able to penetrate that, we're connected to it. In other words, we're connected to it. So of course, Astronism's astro-spiritual beliefs and practices have the goal of encouraging, guiding, and enhancing these human capacities for interacting with the metaphysical dimensions of the astronomical world. And so that's for some reason why you will hear me speak about the mystical elements of astrosis, or astral mysticism, as it is also referred to. It's this idea of enhancing, cultivating, mastering this sort of penetration of the astro-spiritual veil, getting through that veil and understanding the physical as well as the non-physical, and how those interact between this barrier. So then comes in this doctrine of cosmic limitation, or limitationism. Now, the idea of limitationism is very, very fundamental to Astronist philosophy. It's not quite a dogma, so it's not a dogma, but it is a doctrine. It's a very central doctrine of Astronism, and it's very, very important. And it kind of provides the whole basis for Astronism and Transcension itself. Now, it does have, however, some interesting interactions with this idea of metaphysicalism. And really what comes of this is, and because of this is all comes down to basically the traditional understanding of the soul or the spirit. So integral to the definition of a soul or spirit is an entity that transcends physical reality. And so souls have long been understood as existing beyond the limits of physical laws, okay? So in Christianity, for example, the soul is believed to obviously transcend to heaven, but heaven is beyond physicality, of course, but it is also beyond cosmic. It is beyond the astronomical world. It is not part of the astronomical world. It is not part of the cosmos. It is beyond the cosmos, you could say. It is infinite. It is not limited. Because the cosmic law of limitation is universal within the cosmos, this also applies to the soul. So in Astronism, we take a very different understanding of what the nature of the soul is. The nature of the soul is limited until its nature can be transformed into ultimate or universal nature, or limitless nature. So the soul, even after, especially when it's within us, but even when we've died and it releases from us, it is still limited. It cannot leave the cosmos, okay? It goes on the journey of the sidereum, which we're going to talk about a little bit later on. So I don't want to go too far ahead yet, but it goes on this journey, but it does not until transcension occurs. And so that's, again, we're going to get to that. It cannot possess immortality. It cannot transcend the cosmos until other things take place first, okay? And this is how limitationism this is essentially the limitationist understanding of what the soul can do, what it is, and its limits, essentially. And so in this sense, what we need to do is reconsider and largely expand what we mean by cosmic laws of limitation. Metaphysicalism necessitates that the cosmos possesses both a physical and non-physical aspect. So through this, cosmic laws are also both physical and non-physical in the Astronist perspective, meaning that just because a soul is non-physical, this does not exempt it from being subjected to the laws of cosmic limitation. So hopefully that explains why limitationism imposes limitation onto the soul or spirit. Now, this is a very non-traditional alternative understanding of what the spirit is, of what the soul is. It's very astronistic. It's very cometanic, you could say. It is not how the majority of other religions understand the soul, because we see it's essentially because the Astronist cosmology holds different views of reality, essentially, if you want to go even more philosophical. And essentially what it's stating is that limitation kind of pervades all, and that all includes the physical and the non-physical, okay? So, however, imposing limitation on the soul could hold implications for how we understand what this non-physical essence is. When the soul releases or otherwise detaches from the human body at death, it does not leave the cosmos, and thereby, and I should have put that actually there, immediately. It does not immediately leave the cosmos, and thereby remains bound by the cosmic laws of limitation. Therefore, a soul is endowed with the oxymoronic limited immortality, that the soul's existence will expire when the cosmos ends if the soul does not undergo transcosmization. Astronist cosmology therefore subverts much of the traditional understanding of the soul and the spirit, but also spirituality itself. So we'll get to that maybe a little bit later on in the next section. So the metaphysicalist disciplines that exist are sort of threefold, really. We have astrometaphysics, which is which studies the ability of the astronomical world to possess spiritual capacity and metaphysical aspects. Okay. Then we've got astropneumatology, which studies the affairs of the spirits of spirits in the metaphysical dimensions of the astronomical world. So astrometaphysics studies the validity, the justification of the existence of metaphysical aspects of the astronomical world and also its spiritual capacities, okay? Astroneumatology studies the affairs of the spirits in the astronomical world. So that will look at things like the sidereum, the afterlife, or the overworld, as we call it in astronism, basically the spiritual, the journey that the soul goes on in the astronomical world after death. Okay, so that's astroneumatology. You could say that astrometaphysics is more philosophical, whereas astroneumatology is very much more religious, but also spiritual, okay? Then you finally have this sort of catch-all term, really, of astrospirituality that is very widely, very broadly applied. And essentially it includes all manifestations of human interaction with the metaphysical dimensions of the astronomical world. So this will include things like experiencing astral ecstasies, or maybe even exploring things, the ideas of scope, which I've not actually spoke about in this lecture, but maybe sometime in the future. The idea that scope essentially is has origins in the metaphysical aspects of the astronomical world. We'll come to that a bit later in another lecture. But astrospirituality is sort of that more broader term, really. It kind of encompasses all kind of human interactions with the metaphysical of dimensions of the astronomical world. And so let's go on to the astrospirituality then. This is the Astronist spiritual tradition. And I love that shot of the moon there. It just looks really cool. And I love the kind of more purpley, dark purple colors that are going on there. So let's give astrospirituality as a dimension of astronism. Let's give it such a definition, because I previously, just 2 slides ago, I was looking at astrospirituality as a discipline. Okay, but astrospirituality is also a dimension of astronism. It is a form of astronism, and it encompasses a variety of astronist as well as pre-astronist beliefs and practices. So it's not just a discipline, it is also a way of interacting with astronism, and it is also a form of astronism. So astrospirituality is belief in and interaction with the metaphysical aspects of the astronomical world. And of course, this includes deriving a sense of personal guidance or meaning from these related beliefs and practices. Now, astrospirituality can constitute a central role in the life of an astronist, especially a person who, of course, believes in the spirit and believes in the soul, but it is not contingent on being an astronist. So you could say that an astronist's life is more enhanced, is more, you could say, has greater dimensions to it, if they believe in astrospirituality, if they engage with the spiritual aspects of their astronist belief, but it is not contingent on being an astronist. And so that's why being an astronist is different from being a Christian, for example, because the general Christian must believe in the existence of a soul in order to be Christian, or else there is no point at all of being a Christian otherwise. That is not the case in astronism. You can be an atheist astronist, but you can also be a sort of non-spiritual astronist, or a person who doesn't believe in a spiritual soul, because there are other physical and also intellectual dimensions of astronism that an astronist can engage with. So there are various functions of astrospirituality, the majority of which play, the same kind of role as what general spirituality plays in a person's life. Things like, personal growth, belief, obviously, in the metaphysical properties of the astronomical world, relation between the self and the collective, a journey of self-discovery, life purpose, It can also produce stellanic experience, so things like astral ecstasies and things like that, astral visions. And then also, I think as well, it's important to the mastery of one's astronality, the cultivation of one's stellancy, this idea of engaging with the spiritual aspects of the astronomical world. I think that these sort of elements, really, I mean, I was just laughing them because I thought that, you know, originally I didn't kind of engage with that side of things with astronism, and it's only in kind of the last few years, I would say, maybe since my subsumption, I would say, since about, how was it when that took place? I think it was about 2016, was it something like that? 2015? Yeah, I think 2016. And I think since then, I've engaged with my more spiritual side, but I still struggle with it. It's not easy. It is not an easy side of astronism. You know, it's kind of beyond us, and I think that again is another difficult part of engaging with astrospirituality for some people. Because it's beyond the physical, it is difficult to firstly believe, but also it is difficult to engage with. Sometimes it can be quite difficult, whereas other aspects of astronism that are more physical may be more easier to engage with. And so that's maybe why a person may sort of start off to be more physical and then go into the intellectual and then maybe end up more spiritual in the end. So it's a great journey. And this is why I've included it's a journey of self-discovery that astrospirituality takes you on. Then we have really this element, and really this kind of is explored in astronality theory, but I wanted to include it here. It's the spiritual aspects of astronality, the spirituality of astronality. Now, of course, astronality is an emotion fundamentally, and it won't change from being that. It is an emotion, but it also, I think, possesses spiritual dimensions. That an emotional experience can transform into a spiritual experience, and I think astral ecstasy is certainly an example of that. But also that an emotional experience can possess spiritual belief, can express spiritual dimensions. And of course, these spiritual aspects of astronality emerge due to the combination of one's experience of astronality and the spirit as being in flux with the astronomical world. And of course, that relates back to what we were speaking about earlier, which is the doctrine of astrospiritualism. And of course, whether astronality is contingent on spirituality or vice versa remains a topic of debate in Astronist philosophy. So that is something that you might want to think about. Then come back to this video and comment down below to let me know what you think. Is your sort of emotional astronality side of yourself sort of contingent on the existence of astrospirituality, or is it the other way around? I think that my opinion is that the emotional must come first in terms of human perception. But of course, the spirit that is within us has been within us since our birth. So in that sense, the spirit comes before the astronality. But I think sometimes a person's emotional side can bring out a belief in or engagement with their spiritual side. So in that regard, it kind of is a difficult topic to kind of explore, because I think what it gets you to think, well, what do you mean by is contingent on something? So I won't get too far into that, but maybe that's just another topic for another time. But it's very interesting. It just shows that there is so many different aspects of astrospirituality that still need to be explored in full depth. Okay. Then we have this doctrine of prismatism, which really is an extension of everything that I've spoken about, is a fruition really of everything that I've spoken about so far. And Prismatism is this doctrine that, as a result of the metaphysical existence, the existence of the metaphysical aspects of the astronomical world, mouthful, that there are residual pockets of sort of energy or force. I was speaking about the astron force earlier on, that exist throughout the astronomical world, that there are physical manifestations, essentially, of the metaphysical. And these may actually be non-physical, you could say. There could be non-physical manifestations of the metaphysical. That's kind of interesting. This idea, the idea of ideas, you know, are our ideas about the astronomical world, the metaphysical coming through us, coming through our soul and into our brains, that produce ideas, which of course are non-physical. That's kind of me going off on a tangent, but I think it's related to this doctrine of prismatism, which of course means essentially that there exists these sort of residual pockets of astron force throughout the astronomical world that can be engaged with physically, but also spiritually, intellectually, of course. And of course, this prismicity element is this elevated state of the person as being regarded as holding the capacity to seek and attain insight about their astrosis. So it's all converging on this idea of astrosis. It's all converging on that goal, essentially, of astrosis. And of course, here we come to that goal, which is, of course, the transformative, physical, spiritual, intellectual union with the cosmos that is achievable during one's lifetime. And of course, astro-spiritual belief and practice is important to achieving these elements, this state of astrosis. But of course, because astro-spirituality is not a dogma, it is not essential for an astronist, a person's astrosis can be constrained or constricted to a physical and intellectual dimension. And that's fine. Some astronists won't want to go any further than that. And that is absolutely fine. They won't want to engage with, or can't engage with, or don't believe in the spirit, so therefore they can't engage with the spiritual element of their astrosis. What that essentially means is that they will have a restricted or limited astrosis, and so then that has implications maybe later on down the line. But that again is for another video when I discuss more in depth about astrosis itself. Sorry, I just had to take a drink of water there. And then finally, as part of this lecture, we just get on to section 3 here, which is speaking about the doctrine of transtellation, essentially. And the doctrine of transtellation has, of course, a soteriological as well as an eschatological function. And of course, there I've described it as the soteriology and eschatology of the stars. And I love that. It's so cool. It's so amazing. I love this elements of astronism. It's very, very interesting to think about. And I think it also has implications for transcension, of course, as being a salvational and also eschatological belief. So here with this, we come to what we call analytic metaphysicalism. So this is a form of metaphysicalism that is directly related to the salvific endeavor of transcension. And so essentially what it states is that metaphysicalism, or the metaphysicality of the astronomical world, plays a central role in this salvific endeavor of transcension. And of course, this includes both the embarkation onto transcension, as well as its total completion and its perpetuation. And also what analytic metaphysicalism sort of can include essentially is the philosophical consideration of the spiritual dimensions of transcension, which is not something that oftentimes I speak about. I often focus on the physical dimensions of transcension, and that's fine, but there are spiritual dimensions of it. Analytic metaphysicalism also studies transcension from the perspective of transcension being a form of spiritual salvation, or the salvation of the soul. And of course, that relates to this doctrine of transtellation and the idea that at death, our soul transmigrates to the stars. And of course, what we achieve through that is hopefully salvation at the end of it. But then also we have the idea, of course, of astrosis, and this idea that during our lives we can achieve some degree of salvation of our soul through engagement with astronism, but also through engagement with transcension. Now, the underlying notion here is that the metaphysical dimensions of the astronomical world can be used or otherwise engaged with by humanity in order to further the process of transcension. And this is, of course, the underlying belief of analytic metaphysicalism. It's the idea that metaphysicalism can be used. And I thought about this. I thought, yes, it can. Of course, it can be used. Of course, this can be applied to transcension and can further transcension, because that is the ultimate goal of astronism, is to complete transcension. So, of course, we can use the metaphysical aspects of the astronomical world and also the metaphysical aspects of the person in order to do that. So it just made sense to me that there would be this idea of the metaphysical dimensions helping transcension along. Now, in this view, achieving the goals of transcension are viewed as contingent on both humanity's metaphysical engagement with the astronomical world as well as its physical interaction with it. So, of course, this means that transcension is, of course, the completion of transcension is contingent on the metaphysical and the physical engagement with the astronomical world. Okay, and so these goals of transcension won't come about until we have that metaphysical understanding. Okay, so that's the basis of combining really transcension with metaphysicalism. Then we have this belief, or this process really, of astranthropy. Now, I've come across astranthropy in various cultural, spiritual, religious, philosophical realms, you could say, or instances. And I describe it as the transmigration of one's soul to the stars upon death. Okay. And I see this doctrine really as being the basis of the astrospiritual tradition and of astrospiritual belief. Now, this belief holds prehistoric roots in my observation of the origins of religion and the origins of the astronic tradition, of course, in the Upper Paleolithic. And I spoke about that in my master's dissertation, where I was, which is called Astronomy in the Origins of Religion. So please take a look at that if you want to know more about the roots of astranthropy. And of course, this is an astronist belief. Of course, it's pre-astronist, but I think that with astronism, we've added to this belief of astranthropy and kind of tried to decipher it a little bit more, to clarify what it actually is and how it differs from other related beliefs. Okay. And of course, for astranthropic phenomena, for this astranthropic process to take place, to be complete, there must exist a metaphysical dimension to the astronomical world so that the soul can be released into this metaphysical dimension of the astronomical world. Otherwise, the soul wouldn't be able to do that, would it? It'd have to release into the physical, and that just doesn't make sense because it is metaphysical, of course. So there must, in order for astranthropy to be true, metaphysicalism must also be true. Then this is one example of an astronist addition to the ideas of astranthropy and transtellation, and it is the idea of the sidereum. This idea that the soul goes on a journey among the stars after death, and that this journey comprises of 7 steps, and that at the end, the soul's union of with the cosmos takes place, and thereby the soul has completed its journey, essentially. But there are other elements to that. It's not just as simple as that. There are other things that humanity has to do, especially regarding transcension, before that can take place. So I'm just going to read out these two, the middle paragraph and the bottom paragraph, just to try to get this across as what I mean by the fact that the soul, of course, goes on this journey, but it's not just about that. There are other things that take place. So I'll just take a swig first. The stages of the sidereum describe how the metaphysical aspect of a person, meaning the soul, unites or otherwise becomes one with the metaphysical aspects of the astronomical world as a result of its release from the body at death. The culmination of the sidereum is a metaphysical unification of autonomous cosmic entities. What I mean by that is an autonomous cosmic entity is a human person, okay? It's anything with a soul, it's anything with a metaphysical aspect. It could also, I mean, it could be expanded to include non-inanimate beings, or like planets or stars or things like that. But in this case, we'll just narrow the definition to human beings. Autonomous cosmic entities. Sorry, I'll start off that again. Sorry for interrupting that. The culmination of the sidereum is a metaphysical unification of autonomous cosmic entities with the wholeness of the cosmos in a process called cosmic cessation. The cessation of the cosmic limited elements of the soul allow for the soul's transcosmization to ultimate limitless state, okay, to an ultimate limitless state, thereby transforming its nature. Now, what I mean by that is that the soul cannot transcosmize until transcension of humanity has occurred, because our nature has to be changed first. Our limited nature has to be altered, transformed, changed, transcended first in order for the soul, our souls, to transcosmize, to undergo this transcosmization. And this is the final part of this lecture today, this final slide. And it's this idea of transcosmization, which is still very mysterious. It's a very strange part of astronism, but also it's a very interesting part of astronism. And you could say it's actually the ultimate goal of astronism is the idea of transcosmization, the escape of the cosmos, essentially, escaping the cosmos. So I'll just, again, read these 3 paragraphs out, because I think I've written these pretty well. So I just want to kind of get across what I mean here. Transcosmization is the ultimate process by which all physical and non-physical entities in the cosmos sort of transform, in a sense, a limited nature of an entity. So meaning that transcosmization is the retransformation of the cosmic limited nature of an entity. by going into, obviously, universality, unlimitedness, limitless existence. This is described in Astronism as reaching the ultimation, due to ultimatia being perceived as something's universal, unlimited nature. Okay? Transcosmization is therefore the process of an entity literally leaving the limited existence of the cosmos, thereby transmitting both the physical, that should be transiting, sorry, both the physical cosmic periphery as well as the metaphysical cosmic periphery, which is done by the soul via cosmosis and is contingent on transcension's completion. So what I am describing here is the furthest reaches of astronism, okay? This is the furthest reaches of the Astronist belief system, so far in the future, so beyond what we can at this moment comprehend, and this is why I've got a headache. I've just got a headache from reading that because it's so beyond our physics, where I'm at right now. And it's kind of really difficult to kind of get your head around this idea of transcosmization, leaving the cosmos, leaving, transcending your own existence. And this is at the furthest reaches of transcension here. This is the furthest reaches of astronism, beyond which, of course, we have the ultimation, which again is still very mysterious, very unknown. But I believe in transcosmization, and I believe that it is connected to the metaphysical and it is connected to the physical, okay? And I think that that is the culmination of astrospirituality itself, that transcosmization is ultimately the goal of astronism, the goal of transcension, and the ultimate goal of astrospirituality, and on top of all that, the ultimate goal of combining astronomy and spirituality and religion as well. And so that nicely ties into the original title, of course, of this lecture. And I think we'll leave it there for today, this idea of transcosmization, because I think we've got to the furthest reaches of my capacity right now. So, and I hope that that's been sort of interesting for you guys. It's given me a headache, so it probably will have given you a headache, because it is so far beyond what we are right now, and there's so much we have to do in order to get to that stage. Whether we will or not is something that only the future can tell us. So with that, I will say thank you for listening to this lecture on astronomy and spirituality, and I hope that you will take something from this and apply it to your own astronist life. And I will see you in the next episode of A Conversation with Cometan. I've been your host, Cometan, and I will see you next time, guys. See you later.